Hi folks, my name's Ross. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, East Coast DCC. The more astute amongst you will have noticed that we've changed location. I've now moved the boards into what will be the railway room in the house. I've set up the back boards at the minute along the back wall there temporarily. May need to move them or take them out because there's a bit of work to do with track fitting and wiring at the back there. But want to get on with the front boards, which will run across here. The three boards giving me the 3.6 metre run or 12 foot run across the room. Hopefully you can see since my last video I've been doing a bit of work on the track bed, and basically what I've done there is I took offcuts from the cork roll and cut them on the cutting mat with a sharp knife with a scalpel into lengths that will form a track bed. Cut out shaped pieces for the points and crossovers, and basically the reason I've done that is I want to ballast the track, and putting that track bed in just lifts the track up that bit and allows a shoulder on the ballast to make it look hopefully a bit more prototypical. You'll see there I've got holes cut in the cork for the point motors. So what I did was I took the crossover and point section here for the junction into the TMD as the starting point. Started with this point here and then worked my way along, positioning them, making sure they were straight. That allowed me to mark up to put in the track bed. That was then glued down with PVA glue. That was a wee bit precarious because I needed to put weights on it to make it stick down properly to the cork bed below, stop it lifting. Had a wee bit of problem with it sticking. I used a bit of paper there, but it stuck to paper. But anyway, it's fine, it'll get covered by the ballast, isn't a problem. Prior to that, I had cut the various holes for the point motors through the baseboard, checking for interference against the cross bracing below. And then once I'd stuck the track bed down, basically just cut that out with a knife. I have started to mount the point motors below the board, and again, I don't know if you can see the operating wires are sticking up there. I'll go into a bit more detail on the points in another video. Also see over there, hopefully, my control panel, which is put together using the switch and LED sets from DCC Concepts that work with these the Cobalt points. I'm pretty chuffed with it, it's come together nicely. Again, I will do a separate video on the control panel, give a kind of brief overview on how I made that out of an old box file, which I'm quite pleased with. And it's set up just now temporarily just so that I can check the operation of the points motor. It's not the correct point it's going to operate, it's just wired in roughly just now, but hopefully you'll hear the point motor moving. And then solidly clicks across as the point motor moves all the way through its arc. So I'm going to get focused in on the wiring underneath. That's going to get quite complicated because I've got a DCC bus to run. Because of the way that I'm setting the tracks up, I'm going to run at least two buses, power buses, one for each of the main lines. I may put in a third one for the branch line, which will come off here. That will, in theory, allow me, if I get the wiring right, to operate both or operate separately as analog DC or DCC control. I have done it before in my test layout with various plugs and thinking about which rails live, etc. So I'm fairly confident I can do that. Need to do a bit of testing on the way to make sure I'm not going to cause any short circuits. You maybe see up on the wall there the display cabinet with some nice BR Blue large logo, ScotRail, etc. Meld in old BR green. As I say, I've got a mixture of analog and DCC locomotives, and I want to be able to run them independently, but I do enjoy the analog. Computer control's great, but there's something about the old analog system. Anyway, I'll flip the board over and let you see the underneath, and then I'm going to crack on with getting the wiring done. So apologies for the rather irritating spot on the last video. I think it was a reflection of one of the lights. Apologies if you found that too distracting. Anyway, live and learn. I've moved the camera down to give me a better view of the baseboard here and then onto the points and the point motors, and you can see the track bed here and then the hole that's been cut, and then that wire comes through from the point motor below. If you watch this point motor here, you can see that operating, and then basically the wire flicks the point across. It's a good positive motion. As I say, I'm pretty chuffed with these points motors, the way that they've all come together. So I've flipped the board over now, and you can see the point motors mounted to the underside of the baseboard. This motor here is temporarily wired in for the minute, just to test the operation of the point motor. The switch sends an alternating pulse depending on which way the motor is going to go down these two wires. It's quite a clever setup. I'm not going to say I really understand it. I'll maybe try and do something on it in a later video, explain it a bit better. And then you can see here, the point wire goes up through the baseboard, and it's the movement of this lever here. So if I flick this, hopefully you can see it. And you can see that arm moves up. The wire goes through a fulcrum point below the baseboard, which then operates the point. So I pulled the camera back a bit to give you a better view of the underside of the boards. Thankfully, all the holes have lined up quite neatly. Although the amount of wiring that I'm going to have to run underneath the boards, I'm wondering if these holes are going to be big enough. Anyway, I'm sure we'll manage, we'll get by somehow. I'd like to say thank you to Trevor at Hobby Tracks up near Loch Gilphead on the west coast of Scotland for all his help in deciding on what wires I should use. He was very patient on the phone with me, discussing through the various options and what he had in stock at that point. So I have gone for 3202 cable to run the power buses with, in red and black. I've then gone for 1602 to run the droppers from the power bus to feed into the tracks. I'm going to use these little slide block connectors. I don't know if you can see that. Chocolate block connector that then pushes together, makes connecting and disconnecting very easily. I'm going to mount one of these on each inside of each of them. So basically you've got a tail comes through, plugs in, makes taking the boards apart easier if I ever need to do that. This is wiring that I used previously for my test layout, and this is what I was describing earlier in the way that it's wired, so that when I was running it in DCC, I plugged this in, and then there was feed wires came out to the rails, so everything was energizer, all the rails had power. When I wanted to run it in analog, and therefore using the points as the switches to isolate various sections, basically just disconnected that part, and it took the power feeds away from the sidings. So I'll probably do a bit more on that once I come to do some more wiring. Decided to go for 1602 reel for the point motors, and I'm going to use blue and yellow as the colours there to avoid confusion with the power bus. And basically what I'm going to do there is run a short feed from the point motor to a 3 amp, I think that's a 3 amp chocolate block connector, and then wire that into the plug or into the lead that will then come to the control panel. Again, reason for doing that, should I ever have to come to take the boards apart, it will make taking all the wiring out a lot easier. It also means at the minute while I'm setting things up and deciding ultimately where the control panel is going to sit, I'm not having long run of cables. I'm not sure where they're going to end up. So basically the next job is to run the bus wires along with the connectors, and then wire up each of the points onto chocolate block connectors that will sit inside the frame. Again, don't know if you guys will be able to see this. This is a diagram of the layout, the points and the LEDs. This is it as you would look at the layout. What I've done to make wiring easier is I've flipped it and put it into reverse. So basically that tells me where all the point motors are. This part's not put in yet. I've still to finalise point motors over here, so we'll not worry about that at the minute. This is the section I'm focusing on just now. So the next job is basically to number all of the point motors and decide which ones need to operate in unison, because there's a couple of them that I want to operate at the same time, and that's what that harness is for, to run the power out to 2 motors at the same time. And yeah, a bit of wiring. I enjoy wiring, be a bit head scratching. Not going to film it because it'd be pretty boring. Hopefully I'll come back to you in the not too distant future and be able to show you the nice wiring underneath the board. So thanks again for watching, folks, and catch you again soon. Hi folks, welcome back. I thought I would just do a little kind of wind up piece on the wiring. Hopefully you can see from the underside of the baseboard there that we've made some quite good progress over the last wee while. Started off by running the power bus, one for each of the main lines. I'm putting one power bus in for each main line. I may put a third one in for the branch line, wait and see how that goes. As I said, I'm using these block connectors that pull apart quite easily to connect the different sections, and that means if I ever come to move the layout, it will be easier to dismantle the power bus. Then going to run droppers and 1602 cable off the power bus and feed that into the appropriate rails around the layout. If we have a look at the switch panel that I made up, still got a wee bit of work to do on this. I want to put some black tape in to make the lines more clearly identifiable, but pretty chuffed with how that came together. If we look at the underside of it, and hopefully you can see that okay, you can see the wiring's fairly complicated. I'll maybe do something separately on how this is all wired up because it's quite a nice system. But basically all the point switches feed into block connectors there, which I have then marked up which appropriate point it needs to go to on the layout. And as I say, I'm using block connectors here and on the underside of the layout, because at the minute I don't know where the panel's going to go, so I don't want to have lots of cable running around that I may not need. So I made up a schematic diagram when I was planning this. I got this, I think it was a Word document on the DCC Concepts site that I was able to download and then use it, and hopefully you can see that okay. And I numbered the different switches, so switch 1, switch 2, switch 3, switch 4, switch 5, etc. and then worked out what combination I needed the points to go in. It was quite tricky thinking about that, looking at the underside of the board. So what I did was I flipped this and printed it in reverse. So that then gives me a schematic of the layout, looking at the points on the underside. And as I say, I've not put these point motors in yet, just the main ones here. So you'll see it's upside down, but that says point E, and that's point E down there. And then as I say, I'd worked out which points need to run together. So points A and C need to go at the same time. So that's point A there, point C there, flip it over, point E there, point C there. So point C and point A are then wired together. I made up looms from the 1602 cable that I've got. So I've got a 100 metre reel of blue and a 100 metre reel of yellow. That was the most economic way to buy the cable. However, because this is fairly complicated under there, I needed a way to identify where the different points wires were going. So what I did was I got, I think this is 1.2mm heat shrink in different colours, and used that to cover the end of the blue cable, and then sheathed both in this 3.2mm heat shrink in yellow. So that basically gives me that wire is set up as yellow blue, and that would be marked on there according to that, and I'll then be able to match that up with the underside of the switch panel. As I say, for the other ones, I've done yellow orange, yellow green and yellow white. Just used a short piece of the heat shrink to cover the end of the blue wire, and then covered it with the yellow heat shrink. hopefully you saw me doing that in the time lapse that I put together there. Once that was all done, connected up to these 3 amp chocolate block connectors, which are then screwed in onto the side. And once I get the layout in place, I'll run the longer cables through, and once I know where the control panel is going to sit. So pretty chuffed with progress so far. Next job is just finalising the points and starting to pin the track down on the other side. Make a start on that next. And yeah, hope you found this of interest, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you.